This chapter continues presenting practices that create merit that will form conditions for bodhicitta to arise and to remain. He already presented the practices of offerings and praises and confession. Also, here he included the taking of refuge. So here the practices number 8, it seems like 8. There's 8 branches of practice, if you include refuge, and if you include the practice of taking the vow of the Bodhisattva, of bodhicitta, then it comes to 10. So you have 7, sometimes there's 7 practices, like what we just read in the, prior to the request for the teachings, we read 7 branches. So now in the 3rd chapter are the practices of rejoicing, requesting, beseeching or supplicating, and dedication. And it starts out with the practice of rejoicing. And what we're talking about is a continuation of what's called the 2 accumulations. And these 2 accumulations of what's called 2 accumulations of merit, or we taught that the 2 accumulations means conceptual merit and a non-conceptual wisdom. And through these 2 accumulations, through these 8 practices, or 7 practices, or 9 practices, our negative patterns are transformed. We change our negative patterns, and we become more familiar with virtuous patterns, virtuous habits. And through these practices, offerings and so forth, then our negativity kind of loosens up, and our fixations, our negative fixations, begin to dissolve, erode. And that erosion of our negative habits, all our sort of negative trains of thought that provoke and stir up our kleshas, those allow wisdom to dawn. And these, as these practices are presented, then there's this conceptual merit, which means that there is an actor, there's a practitioner engaging in a practice, and there's a recipient of the practice, whether it's offerings or confession or rejoicing and so forth. And through this practice, then this conceptual merit is established, or conceptual merit is what's called accumulated, sort of in your mind stream, becomes embedded in your mind stream. And if we practice for a practitioner, like a practitioner, we should aim and infuse our practice with non-conceptual wisdom beyond what's called beyond those three, beyond the context of the actor or the practitioner, the practice, and the recipient of that. Just a much grand mind, a grand scope. As well as the two accumulations, we need to, as we went into the previous chapter, we need to purify the obscurations of the mind, principally two obscurations of the mind, the emotional, or not emotional, the mental afflictions, the kleshas, and our obscuration to our cognitive obscuration, that which prevents us from recognizing our true nature. These are two very substratum, subconscious obscurations that have prevented us up to now in recognizing our true nature. And so through these two practices of the two accumulations and the two levels of purification, then the one, like the accumulation of merit, provides the conditions for Buddha nature to be recognized. Merit provides the conditions for for Buddha nature to be recognized, and the purifying the two obscurations allows the qualities of Buddha nature to be naturally revealed. So there's a revealing of Buddha nature, and then there's a recognition of it. And this arises, this occurs to an individual on the basis of the accumulation of merit and the purification of these two obscurations. So that's what we're doing. And that's what Shantideva is doing and has done. And now he's explaining to us what he's done, as we can think of this as almost a direct instruction based on what Shantideva, who was a great bodhisattva, what he did, or what he did then. So the next practice is the practice of rejoicing. And rejoicing means being happy about something. We can rejoice at virtue, and we can rejoice at non-virtue. We can rejoice, and one of the since rejoicing becomes a cause, it's an action, it's a motivated act. The characteristic of rejoicing is that the one who rejoices in something, like the one who rejoices in, say, the virtue of someone, then the karma, the result, is the same as the one who is performing the action that you are rejoicing in. Is that clear? Similarly, if you rejoice at someone who's practicing some negative action, a harmful action, or unvirtue, if you rejoice at someone who's practicing virtue, non-virtue, then you accrue the same seeds of non-virtue that give rise to the suffering of non-virtue. If you rejoice at someone else's good qualities, then you acquire those qualities. Someone else is being generous, and you rejoice in that generosity with no envy or jealousy. Then the virtue that's acquired by the other one is your virtue. And if you rejoice in someone's, for instance, generosity, but they're not really motivated, they're doing it out of some obligation or they're doing it to show off, but you rejoice in their generosity with a good heart, then you are actually, your practice is yielding a greater result. Your virtue is greater. That's why in Paltra Rinpoche, his lineage, I guess, or he calls this the practice of the secret practice. It's the secret, or the secret and magic practice. If you're and this might, you might take this to heart. If you're a sincere Buddhist practitioner and you're too busy to engage in a lot of practice, then you can simply make rejoicing your main practice. And that's your, it's your, the results of that practice will be the same as if you're rejoicing in someone who's, say, building stupas all over the world, or is engaged in a long, deep, very wonderful retreat, and so forth. Or if you rejoice at people who are able to, say, attend a Drupchen, then you can have the same benefit, the same results, the same merit, since we're talking about the accumulation of merit here. So that's why Paltra Rinpoche, when he taught the Bodhicharyavatara, called this the secret and magic practice. If you rejoice in your own good things, like we talk about rejoicing in others, but if you rejoice in your own good qualities, it can become an antidote to low self-esteem, by the way. If you remember the kindness of others, if you reflect on the kindness of others, that's a form of rejoicing. That will lead you to the merit of rejoicing. Ideally, or let's say as a practice, we should strive to carry out the rejoicing with either devotion or with respect, with loving kindness, with a pure view, without jealousy or without envy. And actually, as we know, the practice itself of rejoicing directly antidotes jealousy and envy. If you have a habit, if your reaction to other people's good fortune, you should examine your mind and see how, whether or not jealousy and envy are if you can identify in your mental, in your mind, if you can identify jealousy and envy, then you'll know how to sort of navigate rejoicing. You'll recognize that rejoicing will be an antidote to that. And so you're exposing your fault of envy and jealousy. And instead you turn your mind and rejoice. Then you've sort of brought out the target and the target of your practice to antidote, and it reduces your jealousy and envy. With joy, now the Shantideva says here, with joy I celebrate the virtue that relieves all beings from the sorrows of the states of loss, exulting in the happy states enjoyed by those who yet are suffering. Okay, so here he's rejoicing in the context of three types of individuals, particularly the three kinds of merit of individuals. As you know, like there's virtue or merit that leads to happiness, and then there's virtue that leads to liberation, like happiness in samsara, and then there's virtue that leads to liberation from samsara, and then there's virtue that leads to Buddhahood, to the complete enlightenment, to omniscience. Is these three, so what we could call these are the three scopes of an individual's way of practicing or way of acting. Okay. And so here, the first one is those of what's called the lesser scope of an individual who practices virtue. For instance, the practice of giving up the 10 categories of non-virtue, killing the 3 physical actions, the 4 verbal actions, and the 3 mental actions. One who practices giving up those, and one who practices the 10 virtuous actions, the actions, the physical conduct actions of preserving life and so forth, and the verbal actions of truthfulness and so forth, and then the mental actions of patience and loving kindness and wisdom and so forth. So all these categories are engaged in by we ordinary beings, but there's no, what he's talking about here, virtue that relieves beings from the sorrows of the states of law. So he's rejoicing in virtue on the level of cause, the 10 virtues and the 10 renouncing or avoiding, renouncing the 10 non-virtues and practicing the 10 virtuous actions and so forth are the cause for happiness, and we rejoice in that. Not to disparage or diminish when you hear or see or think about all the qualities, the wholesome qualities that people are behaving, conducting themselves in body, speech, and mind, and you rejoice in that. Exulting in the happy states enjoyed by those who yet are suffering. They're still in samsara, and they're still subject to the suffering of change, the suffering of one form of suffering on top of another, the suffering of pain, and then the all-pervasive suffering of potential suffering. So they're still subject to that as a result, but the result are the three higher states, human and heavenly states. And so you rejoice both from the cause point of view, that is to say, in the good, wholesome, virtuous actions that individuals are performing, and in those who are experiencing the results of virtue, wealth, comfort, ease, contentment, and so forth, shelter, food, all the things that are the result of virtue. So you're rejoicing in cause and results. Then, but here they're just done, sometimes people are taught good conduct, respect that promotes respect and those kinds of qualities. But they're not done. This ordinary called samsaric virtue is not done with renunciation for samsara as a motivation or as an attitude, and it's not done with the idea of belief or the belief in a non-self. Virtue doesn't have to be selfless, done without selflessness. And also there's no bodhicitta as an attitude, but it's that virtue that promotes happiness. Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas are, their whole orientation is to bring beings to the bliss of enlightenment. And so if they experience happiness along the way, for whatever reason, that brings delight to the bodhisattvas and the Buddhas. It's taught in the sutras to successfully traverse the path of awakening, we have to know happiness. We have to have our own personal experience of happiness. If we don't have happiness, then enlightenment, like it says in the sutras, for someone who's unhappy, or for someone who knows no happiness, enlightenment is very far away. For someone who knows happiness, enlightenment is very close. Particularly in the Mahayana, because one of our slogans is like, may all sentient beings be happy, have the causes of happiness. If we don't know what we're talking about, there's no juice to it. There's no life force to it. It's just an H, a P, and a Y. And you know how to read, say, or know how to repeat something that someone tells you, but you have no experience of happiness. So it's important that people are happy. And so when they engage in virtue without being self-righteous, we should rejoice in their happiness. And if they're experiencing the results of happiness, then Shantideva says he rejoices in that. How wonderful that they're experiencing the results of virtue. And the second verse is for those in the sort of with a middling scope. Here it says, I revel in the store of virtue, cause of gaining the enlightened state, and celebrate the freedom won by living beings from the round of pain. So here this I revel in the stores of virtue, cause of gaining the enlightened state. So now he's talking about a virtue that on the causation level are infused with or driven by renunciation and egolessness. Those are the cause, those are the kinds of virtue that result in gaining the enlightened state. And here the effect, the result level is celebrate the freedom won, meaning the results of that kind of virtue by living beings from the round of pain, freedom from samsara. This is the liberation of the arhat or the shravaka in the Shravakayana teachings, Hinayana, and the Pratyeka Buddhas, so the private Buddhas. What I think Herbert Gunther called the lone wolf Buddhas. So this is to do with those who are striving for liberation from samsara by accumulating virtue, and we rejoice in that, and we rejoice in those arhats who have become freed from samsara, freed from the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death, which is the attainment of arhat. Arhats, their kleshas have completely dried up, have completely been incinerated. They have no causation process that drives them to take rebirth in samsara again. They've attained the non-returner and so forth, the different paths. And also, so we rejoice in them for both the causes that they're enacting and the results that they've attained. When those who have and those who have, those who are engaging in those practices and those who have received the results of them. Also, it's the arhats that have preserved both the words of the Buddha regarding the Vinaya, the basket of teachings of discipline, the Vinaya. They've preserved the words of those and the lineage of adhering to and realizing those teachings of the Vinaya. And so rejoice in that. Without the Vinaya, the basis for practicing the Dharma is not there. And when Buddhism spread from India to other places, the first teaching and the first practice that was presented was Vinaya. Like in Tibet, if Buddhism was going to take root there, then the king sent 7 candidates, 7 men to India to take ordination and come back. And if they could maintain the integrity of that ordination, then he said, then that would mean that that the teachings of the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, would thrive in Tibet. The same thing happened in China and in Japan. That the first thing was ordination, Vinaya, and if that held, then the other elements of the Tripitaka were assured of having a sound foundation. And so we should rejoice, contemplating that, rejoice in the arhats for having maintained that. As the Vinaya, and then the discourses, the sutras, and then aspects of the doctrine. But it's the sutras and the Abhidharma, the discourses and the Abhidharma and the discourses and the doctrine that are considered the Dharma, just the Dharma. The Vinaya is taught that the Vinaya is considered to be the Buddha and the Dharma. So Vinaya is very central, and it's because of the early masters of the Vinaya that has been maintained, and it wasn't discarded or neglected. So that's a source of our rejoicing and gratitude. So gratitude has to, like I said, gratitude is ushers in this rejoicing. Then there's the third verse. It's only 2 lines. And in the Buddhahood of the protectors I delight, and in the grounds of realization of the Buddha's heirs. So this is the great scope of the Bodhisattva, the enlightenment, the Mahayana, enlightenment according to the Mahayana approach, with all the qualities of what are called, like when we talk about Bodhi or enlightenment, though Bodhi or Buddha means all that needs to be eliminated has been eliminated, and all the qualities that are all the qualities of the enlightened mind are flourishing or are attained or are matured. How do we say, like all the qualities are fully evident. So this is the Mahayana, and this is both, has to do with Buddha, rejoicing in the Buddhahood, and in the grounds of realization, meaning the Bodhisattva, the Buddha's heirs means the Bodhisattvas on the different paths and levels, the 5 paths of Bodhisattva practice and the 10 levels of Bodhisattva practice. So just two schemes of relating to the whole entire path of the Bodhisattva, from taking the vow of Bodhisattva up to just before the level of Buddhahood. And so we rejoice in the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and they're both there from the causative, on the causative level and on the resultant level. Well, here the resultant is presented here, and the Buddhahood of the protectors I delight. So that's the result. Then the next verse has to do with rejoicing in the cause of their enlightenment. Is their enlightened attitude an ocean of great good that seeks to place all beings in the state of bliss, and every action for the benefit of beings, such is my delight and joy. So here, this enlightened attitude, which is, if you want to rejoice in that enlightened attitude, then read the first chapter again. I think that first chapter takes you maybe 5 to 7 minutes. And if you could read that and use that as a creator for your own orientation, your own motivation, and a source of rejoicing, then what could go wrong? So that seeks to place all beings in the state of bliss, meaning Buddhahood, and every action for the benefit of beings, meaning the 6, particularly, we're talking about the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas, actions for the benefit of beings on the Bodhisattva path has to do with generosity and discipline, patience, diligence, and meditation, and prajna, wisdom. So all that we rejoice in. A very familiar example of how rejoicing equals, and rejoicing in a virtuous deed equals a virtuous deed is the probably very familiar recounting of King Prasenajit, who was a king during the time of Buddha, who invited the Buddha and his whole entourage, hundreds, to host them, I think for a month or a number of months. And he offered all of his wealth to the Buddha, as well as all this sumptuous food. And then in conclusion, or at the end of that month before the Buddha was leaving, then the Buddha, typically when you offer a meal, then the Buddha or the Bodhisattva or the yogi dedicates your merit to the enlightenment of all beings. In the fringe of this group, who were the beggars who would receive the excess. And there was one beggar woman there who rejoiced at the king and was just so happy that the king had such wealth and such imagination to be able to use his wealth to invite the Buddha and his entourage and take care of them for a month and offer all his wealth. She rejoiced so much in that. That made her so happy that there was somebody that could do that. So that when the Buddha Shakyamuni, he asked the king, now I'm about to dedicate the merit, and so we want to dedicate the most merit. And so you've done all this offering and so forth to myself and these monks and so forth. So shouldn't I dedicate the source of the most merit in this assembly? And the king said, yes, of course. Don't dedicate it to whoever has the most merit, whoever has acquired the most merit. And so he said he dedicated the merit based on the merit accumulated by this beggar woman. And so that shows, that's a story that talks of how rejoicing can equal or even exceed an act, a virtuous act. Then the highest form of rejoicing, just to shift levels here, the highest form of rejoicing is at the point of recognizing one's own Buddha nature. Just thought I'd interject that. And of course, that's the result of the accumulation of wisdom. Rejoicing in this conceptual dualistic manner is the accumulation or the acquiring of merit that is based on a person rejoicing in someone else's as an object. Okay, there's the rejoicer, the rejoicing, and then there's what's rejoiced at, what's rejoiced in. If not do that, but to practice in that way. This also applies to generosity and confession, purifying, and so forth. But to do that within the scope of emptiness, beyond the three spheres. This is all of this, the actor, the action, and the recipient of the action are all beyond having their own their own nature. That the three spheres are empty of self. This is how you rejoice, accumulating merit from rejoicing. Then I'll leave that. And the next verse is the fifth verse is supplicating, having the supplication, requesting. And he says, so I join my hands and pray the Buddhas who reside in every quarter, kindle now the Dharma's light for those who grope, bewildered in the dark of pain. So this single verse is the practice of supplicating the wheel of Dharma to be turned. There's rejoicing is quite a lot there. Almost, it's early, but that's quite a bit. It's a very important practice, is rejoicing. Supplicating the wheel of Dharma to be turned. Of course, it's another important practice for accumulating merit and wisdom. Particularly, it's an antidote to ignorance. The first one to request the teachings from after when Shakyamuni attained enlightenment, then it's in the sutras, it says how he just abode, he just remained in the equipoise of awakening, because it was beyond concepts, beyond words or expressions. It was ineffable. And so there was nothing to say. And so he remained silent and just abided in that state. Then, of course, in a human realm, no one had heard the profound Dharma. So there was no one there there were no individuals who could really request the wheel of Dharma to be turned, because one of the elements in requesting the Dharma to be taught is that you have faith in the Dharma, that you have some understanding of its qualities and its benefits, and you want to hear it. Or that you understand that the Dharma has some value. So the first turning of the wheel was requested by the gods, Indra and Brahma, who did appreciate the profundity of Shakyamuni's realization and made an offering. I think Indra offered a turning to the right, a clockwise conch shell, and Brahma, as the kind of the one, there were all the rulers, he offered a wheel, a 1,000-spoked wheel, indicating it's sort of one of the accoutrements of a universal monarch. And they requested him not to remain silent, but to teach those who have ears for the truth that he had realized. And so that interdependence of that request accompanied by an offering, then because turning the wheel of Dharma, teaching is an offering. So offering and offerings, it's an offering for offering. It's a wheel. And the one who requests it values the Dharma, and the one who, the Buddhas or the Bodhisattvas or masters who teach, they value it. And so they're not just gonna, it's not appropriate to just broadcast or proselytize to those who don't value the Dharma. Even in the history, our Tibetan history, Dharma history, the Tibetans went to India, and Indians, that was a Brahmanical, the spiritual life of India was controlled by the Brahmin, or the Brahmins. It was a very strict caste system. And then you had these Tibetans, warriors, barbarians, by their own terminology, their own definition, red-faced demons, the offspring of the ogress, an ogress, and a demon. So that's their story, their myth story of their origination, and then they come tramping down into India, and the Indians were very reluctant to teach them, particularly the Vajrayana, which happens to have been flourishing during that particular time in India. But it was not, if you read the stories of those who went down to India, they had a heck of a time, and very often they were killed on their way back. Some Brahmin or some Buddhist master might have trusted a Tibetan and gave him some teachings on the sly, and word got out, and then they would send people and they would kill him before he got back to Tibet. They were very protective of the Dharma. So for the Dharma to have gone to Tibet, it was a huge risk and a huge undertaking. So here that hearkening back again now to rejoicing. We should rejoice in the hardships that those who have reached attainment have undergone, starting with Shakyamuni. Here, though, turning the wheel of the Dharma means it's kind of a two-way thing. Those who value the Dharma and request it, and those who value the Dharma and give it in an appropriate way. Because of its value, they give it in an appropriate way to someone who values it. Of course, the Dharma that they're teaching is the wisdom that understands or realizes the inseparability of sublime knowing and compassion. When we are practicing this at home, by ourselves, there's no Zoom happening, and you practicing requesting the teaching, then visualize the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, as far as you can think, as big as your mind can make, then place Buddhas and Bodhisattvas there. All your own personal relationships you have with masters, with your own teachers, put in front of you also. And then request them to turn the wheel of the Dharma. Don't let Dharma disappear from this earth. And may I never be separated from the teachings or from the teachers. May I always in my future lifetimes hear about the Dharma, seek it out in all my future lifetimes. May I meet the teachers, and may I request the teachings, may I hear the teachings, may I be able to understand the teachings, and may I be able to integrate those teachings into my entire being. And may I realize those teachings, and may I share those teachings with those who value it, that I have a connection with, or that I understand may benefit from it. So pray in that way. That's all this practice of requesting the wheel of Dharma to be turned. So practice that as much as you can. When you request the Dharma to be taught, there or here or anywhere, you should value or you should understand that the Dharma is the method, the teaching, the Dharma is a teaching on the methods to destroy your ego, or to destroy your ego clinging, I should say, not your ego. That doesn't destroy your ego, it destroys your ego clinging. There is no ego. And that's what you're requesting to have happen. Please destroy the clinging to my belief, my addiction, my habit of believing in a self when there is none. Expose that and incinerate that habit, cut that habit of ego clinging. The teachings of the Dharma elucidate or explain the difference between worldliness and what leads to what leads to egolessness, which leads that which leads to awakening, and that which leads to samsara. So when we request the teachings, we should request to be, what is worldliness? How am I going in the wrong direction? Worldliness means doing things for your own personal gain or to avoid loss, doing things to be noticed and praised, doing things so that you won't be ignored, fear of being ignored or blamed. That's worldly action. Or let's say it's worldly, the mindset is worldly, your motivation is worldly. Do things to become well known and so forth. These are, it's not the act is not the main thing. It's the motivation that determines whether something is worldly or leading to awakening. And so the Dharma teaches the flaws and the downside, the disadvantages of acting in worldly manner, and teaches the advantages of acting in a manner that leads to liberation and awakening. So when we request the Dharma, then that. Okay, I'll leave that. Then the next verse is, I join my hands, beseeching the enlightened ones who wish to pass into Nirvana. Do not leave us wandering in blindness. Stay among us for unnumbered ages. There was one, what's his name? Chanda, who requested the Buddha not to pass into Nirvana. As the Buddha at one time, towards the end of his life, he was entreated by one of his disciples. I think his name was Chanda, something like that. I'm sorry. And through that request and probably other interdependent conditions, then the Buddha did extend his life for some months, 3 months, I believe. It often is that when a Buddha feels as though, this is kind of a, we can't really, Buddha doesn't really think this way, but through the wisdom of Buddha and the compassion of Buddha, basically the Buddha when there's no longer the interdependence to have conditions where a Buddha would teach, then the Buddha would pass into Nirvana. Or in the case of our Nirmanakaya Buddha Shakyamuni, then the Buddha Shakyamuni was born, and so the end of all birth is death. And so that was his final teachings, that he passed into his nirvana because of his birth. But the mind of Buddha, enlightenment is enlightened mind, and it's not enlightened body or speech that is the actual enlightenment. And so we could say the enlightenment of Buddha, the Buddha mind, is unborn. And being unborn, then it's undying. But as a as a conveyance, then there is a vehicle for that through the Sambhogakaya or Nirmanakaya display, and that is subjected to impermanence. And so here we are entreating the Buddhas not to feel as though their work is done, but I'm still here, and it's going to take me a long time to deal with all of my flaws and all of my kleshas and all of my accumulated karma and tendencies that hold me to samsara. So don't abandon me here. So that's the idea here. Do not leave us wandering in blindness. We need to know what to do. We need to know what to avoid and what to take up, what to accomplish. And we need to be reminded of it again and again and again. And again and again and again, we need to be reminded of it. The swirling kaleidoscopic aspects of our kleshas and our karma and our habits and so forth, it always seems as though we have some new issue to deal with. And we forget the Dharma and think that there's something different going on this time. And so we need again and again to hear the teachings of the Buddha. And there's one thing that all of Chakta Rinpoche's, all my friends that studied under Rinpoche or listened to his teaching were always struck by how Rinpoche was so patient and just again and again repeating. Like when Chensi Rinpoche he taught just in one day this whole text. He started out by saying, like this bodhicitta teaching like this, we need to hear this again and again and again, he said. We need to be reminded again and again and again. So it's going to take us a while. So don't pass into nirvana, where we request that in the same way. And when we request, like in the Dharma wheel, to be turned, and here when we request the Buddhas not to pass into nirvana as a practice, when we're doing this practice at home or when we're driving or whatever we're doing, we should, get used to these 7 practices and pull them out now and really get used to them. So when we do the entreating, supplicating the Buddhas to teach, we should hear the teachings. We should feel that the teachers, the Buddha as a teacher, accepts your request and gives you teachings. To remind yourself of some teachings and feel as though it's coming from the Buddha. And here, consider that the Buddhas stay. When you request them to stay, think of the Buddhas as staying. This is outside the scope here, but and I'm just repeating the commentary here, but it occurred to me, and this is a complete footnote kind of, but I kind of feel that when we are Vajrayana practitioners, even though this is Mahayana, when we are at the conclusion of our practice, we request that those deities that we have invoked, the mandalas that we have invoked, we request them to stay. And we point to them we point out to them a place for them to stay, like in the statues or in the stupa, or even in my book, or even in my crystal. And we invoke them to stay. And it seems to me that it sort of carries the same practice, the same kind of practice as requesting the Buddhas not to pass away, not to disappear, not to pass away into nirvana. Anyway, that's completely, what do you say, ad hoc or whatever, something outside. There's no transmission for that, no lineage for that that I know of. But anyway, you think about it anyway. Okay, now then we come to dedication, the seventh. Through these actions now performed, and all the virtues I have gained, may all the pain of every living being be wholly scattered and destroyed. So usually, when we dedicate the merit, as the Khenpo Kunpal mentions here, usually when we dedicate merit, all this merit, may this become the cause for the enlightenment of all sentient beings everywhere. But here, because the whole theme of Shantideva's discourse here is to inspire bodhicitta, especially compassion. Then he's dedicating it here now, in a compassion, to the compassion, out of compassion, he's dedicating it to, may all the pain of every living being be wholly scattered and destroyed. That is to say, those particularly in the lower realms, if you know the lower realms in the doctrine of the Dharma, the way that sentient beings experience their karmic projections is according to the you could say the balance of positive and negative actions, and the balance of the motivation of those actions. And then how that chemistry of that, or what does it be, like the physics of that, of the poisons of the mind, the three poisons of the mind, sort of squirting into the kleshas, squirting into the karma, then it squirts out as our projection of all of that in what can be clumped up into what are called the six realms, or the six possibilities of a sentient being. Six kinds of, not six possibilities, six kinds of possibilities, the six varieties. Within that, then it's still individual sentient beings experiencing their karma individually based on their own clinging to their self-identity. And so there are those that are considered, and in this text that I'm reading anyway, they call this the states of loss. You'll see that here. That's the lower three realms of those who are experiencing mostly negative causes. They're experiencing the results of negative causes, harmful causes, like the stupidity, greed, and aggression or anger, that in their full-blown measure, like full-blown act out of ignorance, the karmic consequences is one of the animal realm. And as you know, there's tons of, that's one of these realms that we can actually see and interact with, and not just take on faith, but even in that animal realm, we can see a full range of experiences, from the most cuddled and spoiled cats and dogs and hamsters to the most, tortured animals, and living in the bottom of the ocean and so forth. And then the full-blown greed experienced as a tormented spirit, where it's just a constant thrust towards something that they'll never even see, or if they see it, it disappears, or if they see it, it turns into something painful. Or the experience of aggression and hatred experienced as the hot and cold experiences of the various forms of negative actions maturing with that kind of motivation. And the hell was called the hell realms. The hell realms and the tormented spirit realm and the animal realm are all predominantly suffering. Very little rest from suffering. One thing on top of another, one thing after another. Then humans and the heavenly realms, called the godly realms. Then there's less suffering, but it's imminent. Because anytime there's ignorance, you are sowing the seeds, you are repeating. Ignorance, as long as we are ignorant of our true nature, then we are repeating moment to moment the causes of samsara. And samsara is one of suffering. It's an ocean of suffering, it's taught. Ocean of suffering means like the ocean is wet. Anywhere you go in the ocean is going to be wet. Anywhere you go in samsara, there's going to be suffering. In what's called the higher realms, that suffering comes intermittently. But we should contemplate that as long as our samsara is produced by ignorance, which gives rise to the three poisons, and which gives rise to the afflictive emotions, which gives rise to karma, which gives rise to our experience, as long as we're in that system that at its root is a lack of recognition of our true nature, ignorance. As long as we're in that system, then the suffering is imminent. We know even ourselves how, even no matter how hard we try, we're always creating some kind of suffering. How we eat and how we travel, always thinking of how to not cause suffering. But there's no, as long as we're in samsara, then it's the nature of samsara to be suffering, just like it's the nature of fire to be hot. So given that, then we should arouse bodhicitta and engage in these 7 methods that create or form in our minds the conditions for bodhicitta to arise. So here he's, first of all, directing his dedication of the virtue, or all these actions, all the virtues I have gained by these, basically by everything that he's, by the first 2 chapters and up to here. Those virtues, the virtue of the offerings and praises and confession and requesting the Dharma wheel and rejoicing and requesting the Buddhas not to pass into Nirvana, all the virtue of that, then may the pain of every living being be wholly scattered and destroyed, especially those in the lower realms, the commentary says. Then in verse 8, for all those ailing in the world, until their every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, nurse, the medicine itself. And so this is emulating, this is dedicating our merit to that, just as the Buddha, for many lifetimes, the Bodhisattva, the Buddha as a Bodhisattva, tended to the ill, tended to those who are weak and sick. And so we should dedicate our merit and make an aspiration to serve those, like I think we would say, or we should be their slave. You know, that word slave was used. A slave means that you do something with no wish to be thanked or paid or anything, just serving. And serving the sick is the way to really do that. And we should look after those who are weak and ill and unable to care for themselves. And then in verse 9 here it says, raining down a flood of food and drink, may I dispel the ills of thirst and famine. And in the eons marked by scarcity and want, may I myself appear as drink and sustenance. And so this refers to sometime in the future, or at least according to the cosmology of the doctrine, our doctrine here, where there'll be a time where there is no food available because of the global warming, I guess you call it, you know, that things will begin to feel as though there are 2 suns and 3 suns in the sky. There's a time of that. And so during that time, then, may I again dispel the ills of thirst and famine. And in the eons marked by scarcity and want, what did he say, 49? Okay, there's a footnote there you can read. Basically, the lifespan contracts because of famine and disease. There's three things that are characteristic of our time period is war, famine, and disease. We can see, you know, kind of we're healthy enough to see, we're well fed enough to see that is the possibilities. There's a long way to go before it becomes a worldwide situation where people don't live past the age of 10, according to here, things like that. And then there's marked by scarcity and want. You can read, there's a period of time that's called the time of the secret eaters, where people just have a little bit, or beings, or maybe they're not even people, but they're a little bit, and they have to eat secretly. And of course, in some parts of the world, this is happening. But this is like the end of time, period. And then there's what's called the spoon eaters, where you just are given, or you can get 1 spoon of food. And then there's a period of time following all that when all that you can find are the bones of those who have died, dried bones. And you bang them on rocks and eat the dry bone. This is called famine. Then, so again, how to avoid that, how to shift the current of that is to make offerings. Mental offerings, use your speech to make offerings of physical, material offerings, because the karma of that is infallible. The karma is infallible. And the virtue of making offerings is to thrive. Karma, oh, it's time anyway. Okay. And so make offerings and offer medicine and offer like serving people, serving like massage and things like that. If you do that with no self-interest, just to relieve others' suffering, then that karma is infallible. When Buddha taught karma, virtue and non-virtue, he wasn't teaching, oh, this act is virtuous and this act is non-virtuous. That wasn't how it, that's not the perspective. What determined what virtue and non-virtue is or became as a teaching is the effect, happiness and suffering. If you look at the effect of an action, and Buddha could look at the effect of an action, bodhisattvas can look at the effect of an action and see the causes. So based on the results of an action, we can say what caused, what's virtuous and what's non-virtuous based on the results. Suffering means non-virtue. It's got nothing to do with, say, we can use the word sin, but we have to qualify that. It has to do with suffering. How much suffering an act produces is its measure of what's called non-virtue. And what happiness an action produces is the measure of its being virtuous. So we should think that way. It will help us it will guide our own behavior. We're not trying to live up to a stricture of conduct code. It's all about, do we want to suffer or not? Okay, for sentient beings, poor and destitute, may I become a treasure ever plentiful and lie before them closely in their reach, a varied source of all that they might need. Okay, so this is all through the power of the virtue. May this all come about. May I be this kind. And so we'll leave it at that for tonight on verse 10. Better write that. So let's just reflect and then for a minute, and then we'll dedicate a merit of reflecting, maybe just, I don't mean reflect, I mean just let everything sink in. It's a lot. Let everything just sink in by not thinking about anything particularly. Just relaxing your mind. Okay, then let's do the closing prayers. All the virtue of this practice and all that is gathered throughout the 3 times, I dedicate to all beings without exception so that they may attain Buddhahood. Following and emulating the omniscient and courageous Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra, I completely dedicate all virtue. Since dedicating merit is praised as supreme by victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate these roots of virtue for the sake of practicing excellent conduct. May the teachings of Lord Buddha, the only source of benefit and happiness, long remain in this world. May the lives of those who uphold these teachings be as stable as a victory banner. Supreme Bodhicitta is so very precious. Where it has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but evermore grow and flourish. Okay, thank you.